Hello, welcome back to Teens for Truth. I'm here with Jeff Morgan, who is someone who he's a Christian advocate for the family. One of his causes that is very dear to him is the repeal of no-fault divorce, which he feels did a lot of damage. And he is here trying to connect with other people who are concerned about the destruction of the family. He comes from the local area. So tell me a little bit about why do you see no-fault divorce as a big fault line for all of us?
So, when we look at some of the issues that are facing the society at large, and even the church, they respond out of the sexual revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And no-fault divorce, there's a few reasons. Right.
There's no wiggle room, right? I mean,
right.
some people say, well, he mentions, abandonment or abuse, but I mean, I think that his basically was saying, once you become one flesh, you cannot put asunder what God brought together.
So in Matthew 19, this is the kind of the way that I read it. And it's a little bit of a more contemporary reading, but Jesus talks about, he's asked about divorce. Can a man divorce his wife for any reason or for no reason whatsoever? Is no-fault divorce permissible, Jesus? And Jesus says, no-fault divorce. First off, no-fault divorce, really what we need to do is redefine what that is. It's actually unilateral divorce. It's forced divorce. One person gets to divorce the other person.
Right. And usually the one who divorces first
wins,
gets all the advantage. I've seen this because my family has had so many divorces. And that's the sick irony of the whole thing is the person who rushes to the courthouse first, literally the person who has the earlier date stamp, usually gets everything because they get to make all the accusations, and then the other person's immediately put as a defendant.
Absolutely.
Essentially, why would a divorce be a question of a plaintiff and a defendant? I mean, so it doesn't. It's crazy.
So you make a very interesting point there, and I've argued the same thing too, because the person who actually is the plaintiff, the first person to file, wins 100% of the time. Because divorce is a lawsuit, it is a legal action, and the other person basically has no defense. If that person loses 100% of the time, and in unilateral divorce, about 75% of the cases, the spouse does not want the divorce.
Wow.
And in even more cases than that, the children don't want the divorce.
Yeah.
So in the United States, we have what's called due process protections of the 5th and the 14th Amendments. And yet that is thrown out the window. We're supposed to be able to have, not be able to lose life, liberty, or property without due process. But in divorce, you have no due process. And how do you know that? Because in every single instance, the respondent loses. And sometimes, they may lose their family, they may lose access to their children, they may lose half of their assets, they may have their money confiscated from them in the form of child support, which is our way of really addressing this issue. And then if for whatever reason, a man or a woman, because it's happening to both genders these days, if they can't make the child support, we in the state of Texas will say, well, you better pay it, because if you don't, we may not allow you to get your auto re-registered. We may deprive you from getting your driver's license re-registered. And if it's really, really, really bad, if you've lost your job for too long, we may even throw you in prison.
I know there are people who go to prison, for not paying their...
So here's a scenario. Person says, listen, I'm trying to save the marriage. And a judge steps in and says, well, it's dissolved because, this person's made the accusation. And by the way, you're now a criminal.
I know. And, this is one thing where this gets into a very sensitive area, but this is not an area where the feminists can just constantly complain about men, because who initiates a majority of the divorces?
Actually, you're absolutely right. It's about 70%
women.
of the cases.
This is a game in which, just like we're doing a lot on sexual harassment and how men have to really clean up their behavior. The family court, that is women's home territory, and and they are pulling all kinds of games, and it's not right. I mean, it's not right, because very often what ends up happening is there are many cases where there are women who can completely support themselves. They just want the other guy to pay for them and then to live somewhere else. And it's like, it's really sad. It's funny because you bring up the 14th Amendment, and I brought up that a lot with gay adoption, because I was saying every child is born with a mother and a father. So you have to begin by saying that is a natural born right. You have, as a child, you have a right to those relationships. Those two people have a duty to you. And so I always argued that it was, the 14th Amendment protections that are always cited in a lot of these movements for no-fault divorce, for gay marriage, actually, if you apply them properly, they should apply to the children. And,
Absolutely.
You know, and the fact that you cannot deprive a child of their mother and father without due process. And you know what? If you hear what I'm saying and you say, well, that's not fair because I don't want to have to be stuck in a relationship with someone that I don't want to be with just because like my kid needs a mom and a dad. Hey, you know what? Your kid is stuck in a relationship in or out of people that they want to be with because of your decisions. So, you know, why are you putting yourself, you're expecting more of your child than you would expect of yourself. So I think that's a big part of the problem.
You know, there's a whole bunch of problems when you look at this because in Texas, you know, we say, well, the marriage is irretrievably broken down or it's insupportable, like, you know, we cannot achieve the proper cause. But another issue that happens that nobody ever talks about, very few people talk about, is in about 8% of the cases. And these people, after the marriage is irretrievably broken, they get remarried to each other. Now, wait a minute. So what just happened? Did you just lie to the court?
Right.
Is irretrievable irretrievable or isn't it irretrievable?
Yeah, right.
And but at the same time, you know, this is a great opportunity, a great arena for family law attorneys to explain people. I was talking with a man last night, and he was saying that in California, they were actually teaching family law attorneys. You know, when you first go in to see the attorney, they want to see your financial statement. And of course, it's just to make sure that you get your fair share, right? Really, in part, what it is to say, okay, so if this guy is worth $1 million, that means there's a law. They don't really put this in writing, but you can take up to 40% of that, and they won't complain if you go over 40% of that. You're going to have some angry people. So the attorneys know, and because really, the attorneys are in the same country club. I'm representing you, you're representing me, you know, whatever. There's two different, and they get together. They even talk together at lunch. Here's what I'm going to do. You can do this. I can do that. Because the whole point is what? Billable hours. And you talk with people that have gone through this stuff, and they say, you know, we had college funds set aside for our children, and the attorneys got that during the divorce. The reality is, it's exploitation. And I mean, and it destroys kids' lives. Now, there's a book that just came out recently by Layla Miller. It's called Primal Lust.
I know. I saw. Layla Miller is actually on my Facebook list.
Is she?
Let me see if I can tag her. To see if she because doesn't she talk a lot about divorce? I have a lot of Catholic friends on Facebook, and Catholics are way into this. Divorce thing. I mean, you know.
So the Protestant, what you're telling me then really is that the Protestant church has capitulated to culture.
Yeah, I think that the Protestant church definitely capitulated way early. I think that a lot of the events are happening in the other room, so I should probably let you go.
No, that's okay. I'll stay here.
Okay,
because, you know, one of the things I want to talk about is that, and you're right. I mean, I've got a lot of Catholic friends, and they've actually made a stronger argument. Recently, I put out a post. I said, you know, I am Protestant, but I find myself in the issues of marriage actually aligning more with the Catholic Church. I had so many people respond to that. It was like the most people I've ever had respond.
No, listen. The Catholic Protestant thing I learned with the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther. It's a big divide. It's a big divide. It's very raw. I find that more painful and more difficult than the gay straight issue. You know, but I really want to thank you and
can I say just a couple more things? Okay, so the myth about divorce is that children are resilient. And what Layla Miller shows in her book is that no, they aren't resilient. They've been silenced. They have been beaten into submission until now, 30 years later, they're coming out and talking about it. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that, you know, in the church today, you'll go to some churches and you hear them say, you know, we're against this, we're against homosexuals. And of course, you know, we should, in theory, be against all sorts of sins. But it's like this group is targeted. And yet, we have a legislator in Texas who made a comment about a couple of years ago. He said, heterosexual divorce has done more to destroy the family than homosexual marriage or same-sex marriage ever could. And that's an issue. And I think that, you know, in the church, if we are not consistent with what we are preaching, you know, people that are saying we want same-sex marriage, it's a right. Well, you know what? We've left marriage a shambles because the true teaching of marriage is one man to one woman for one lifetime, not easy and free divorce. And you have churches today too much at center like, how can we help the people?
Well, they kind of feed each. The way in the debates about gay marriage, you know, what I found frustrating was they feed each other. Divorce and the redefinition of marriage feed each other, and I think people who have, you know, gotten by with divorce tend to feel like they can't criticize the sexual redefinition of marriage, and then vice versa. And so I often find people justifying themselves by pointing to the other example. So it's really hard to just sit them both down and say, look, you know, Matthew 19 makes it clear you can't rush to family court and clean out your ex-husband through alimony, and you also can't run off with another woman. Yeah, or ex-wife. Yeah. That happens.
It happens both ways. And then the other thing is that I remember the first time that I actually met a person who was coming from a Christian background, and he was talking about his struggles with same-sex things and how he prayed, memorized scripture and everything. I was a young, early 20s, and I picked him up as he was hitchhiking and was trying to witness to him and everything. And what I realized is that there was a real struggle, because too often people look at it and they say, well, this is just sin. But I mean, I was just hearing the other interview that you had, there's a real struggle there. And it was something that at a younger age, I started to learn a little bit about. That your interviews have been great. I appreciated hearing them, and they need to get wide publicity because your voice is being silenced. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. We're gonna rush off to the main chapter. I think it's all being live fed through Masters in Texas. So, okay, thanks. Bye-bye.